To continue the lesson on leading as the final topic in our subject organization and management for pre-fi, we begin this afternoon with modern leadership views. I'm 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 quite struck by this line of Peter Drucker. I hope you could find this line there below the label modern leadership views. The line says that effective leadership is not about making speeches or being liked. Rather, it is defined by results, not attributes. So a good leader is defined by what effect he brings about. So we're referring to results of his being or her being a leader. It's not a question of how good the person is with words or how appealing the person is in terms of the number of people who has really liked him or her. These may just have a minor impact to defining what a good leader is, but we are better. Peter Drucker is trying to convey the idea that results should speak louder of how good a leader should be defined. There are several theories or models under the modern leaders under these modern leadership views. To start, we have the transactional leadership model. The transactional leadership model is a kind where there is like an exchange or a condition, meaning something will be offered in exchange for something else. That's di ba? In accounting, that's how a transaction works. Value is given out in exchange for value that's being received. That's the transaction. Value parted with versus value received. So the concept exists. There will be kind of a social exchange. As the leader will provide something perhaps as a reward or as an incentive in exchange for a good performance. That's how the transactional leadership model works. There's quite a danger with this kind of model, though it sounds appealing or it seems appealing because at the end of the day it still leads to the result which is really positive or beneficial to the organization. One possible danger here is in the absence of that reward, in the absence of something to be given in exchange for good performances, the worker or the employee might not do something well in the first place. The employee might just keep on looking for an incentive or the reward. While it's good to have a reward, it's probably also a good thing to just let yourself be naturally driven to work well in an organization. You also have a transformational leadership model. The transformational leadership model works by inspiring others or transforming them to become members or followers geared towards achieving extraordinary outcomes. Like for instance, Nathan is our leader. Then Nathan is our leader. Both of us are Nathan's subordinates. Under the transformational leadership model, Nathan would try to would do his best so that we be transformed into the best versions of ourselves. Nathan would give us challenges. Nathan would give us tasks that would keep on pushing us further instead of just letting us stay how we are already right now. So he's really trying his best to transform us, bring us into a newer version, a better version of ourselves. Another form of model is the charismatic leadership theory. This is by virtue of having a leader that is charismatic. A charismatic leader is one that is really quite confident, one who has self-confidence, one who is enthusiastic and sensitive to both environmental constraints and subordinate needs. A charismatic leader is someone na upon seeing that person, you feel like that person is worth respecting, worth following. There is like an energy or a form of aura that you get to identify from the person, driving you to follow him or her. In the same way, a charismatic leader is capable of inviting people to act as his or her subordinates. It is that particular kind of leadership where even if the leader isn't really demanding for so much, by his sheer or her sheer presence or involvement in the team, in the group, the members really feel as though they should move because the power of the charismatic leader is at work. Another kind of theory is the visionary leadership theory. In here, we have a leader who is capable of creating and translating, articulating visions, which the leader intends for the members to follow and observe. It's such a good leader to it's such a good organization, it's such beneficial to an organization to have a leader who is capable of creating a goal, defining what the goal really is that the group should really take on. If not, without that goal, the organization seems to be undirected, misdirected. If there's a clear vision that the organization is supposed to take on as defined by by a visionary leader, then most for sure, most if not all of the members of that organization will be highly motivated, will be highly participative in the undertakings of that organization. Team leadership theory is another modern leadership view. The team leadership theory, from the word team itself, is one where there is a task to be supposedly performed by the entire group. There's a team context. Most especially that in the practices of today, companies have been utilizing teams or work teams led or guided by leaders. The last one is servant leadership, the servant leadership theory, which gives more importance to service for others. This is that kind of leadership where the leader is more into what he or she can offer to the members of the organization, extending him or herself to what the members could need in response to a particular task that needs to be accomplished. The servant leader puts others first instead of him or herself. So that's the main idea behind the servant leadership theory. It's just a question now of which among these theories we find ourselves situated in. We can't really say that one theory is the best among all these theories, right? It's unfair. It's not right. It doesn't make sense if one of us would say the best theory in leadership is this. There will come a time when a particular theory will be very applicable. There will be a situation where you shall be told that that's the kind of leadership that you should employ. Situations will require that a good leader should be flexible. And the ways of leadership are actually provided here. The theories tell you of what kind of leadership you can employ given a particular situation. In order to also achieve the goals of leadership, a person, a leader, or if not all the members, everybody in that organization should learn the skills of communication. Everybody should be able to communicate. Despite having very good persons in position, despite having so many members in the organization, if communication has not been attained, if people choose not to communicate among themselves, then everything comes out to be pointless. No matter how charismatic the leader is, if that leader is poor in communication, there is no such thing as a good leadership or management in the organization. This brings us back once again to what communication is. As defined, communication is an exchange. Take note, it's an exchange of information and understandings. When we say that it's an exchange, there is a two-way process. The speaker speaks, the listener receives. And at some point, the roles interchange. The listener now becomes the speaker, and the previous speaker becomes the listener of the message coming from the first listener. So if person A is our first speaker, person B is our listener, Person A speaks first, person B listens. For the exchange to happen, person B should now speak and person A should listen. Without the chance for person B to also express himself or herself, communication has not taken place. That is why if you look at the elements of communication of elements of the communication process, you have seven, eight, seven main elements. The eighth one is just an added element. The first element in the communication process is the speaker, of course, the sender. We need to have a person who'll deliver the message, who'll give out the first person to give out the message. That's the sender, sometimes referred to as the speaker. Then that sender has some content to share. That content, which is an idea, a feeling, a particular guideline, an order, or a demand, that's what we call a message. Once that message has already been well thought of, the sender tries to convert that idea into symbols. Symbols that are either said through the mouth or symbols translated in means of writing. And that is the process of encoding. Now that information has been encoded, the speaker or the sender will have to make use of a particular medium, like a way by which the encoded message will be translated to the receiver. The medium perhaps could be in spoken language, in written language, or perhaps the language itself could be a medium. Then from there is a person who will try to understand what the message is, who will try to pick out the idea from that message. That is the process of decoding, translating the encoded message into language understandable by the receiver. And this brings us to the receiver as the sixth element of the communication process. The receiver listens and accepts or absorbs the message that has just been sent. And from there, the receiver provides a feedback. The feedback is the response coming from the receiver. By giving the response, the communication process is completed. Look, there needs to be a time for the receiver to provide a feedback. Without that feedback, the communication process has not been met, has not been achieved. When the receiver gives the feedback, the receiver now becomes a sender. The original sender becomes a receiver of the feedback. So those are your seven main elements of the communication process. But speech or the world of speech would recognize the eighth element, and that is noise. Noise is the hindrance or the disturbances, includes the disturbances to the process of communication. And they can take place at any time, at any part of the process. You have disturbances in terms of language barriers. You have disturbances in terms of noise. There might be a disturbance in the way the message is decoded, a disturbance in the use of the device for the conveying of the message. All of these constitute noise. The word noise in the communication process does not refer only to sound, the sound noise. That's how the layman's term defines noise. It's an unpleasant sound. Diba? That's how noise is um uh technically defined, an unpleasant sound. When something is not pleasant to your ears, you define that as noise. But in the field of communication, noise goes beyond a sound. It's not limited only to a sound. By knowing these elements of communication, we are also told that there are types of communication. Communication can be verbal or non-verbal. Verbal communication involves words. Non-verbal communication involves gestures, body movements, facial expressions, eye contact, physical contact. They are all part of non-verbal communication. Communication may also be formal or informal. Formal communication is one which happens between, probably this is one that happens in a profession. Like when someone is a subordinate to a manager, for sure, the manager will have to speak at a particular tone fitting to the position or profession that he or she has. In the same way, the subordinate will have to tone down his language so as not to appear too casual in front of the manager. Then the informal kind of communication happens among friends or when you talk informally but between or among people. That's an informal way of communication. The direction and flow of communication also varies. You can have a communication which is vertical. Vertical communication moves this way. Take note, vertical communication can come as well in two types. Vertical communication can be upward or downward. If it's an upward communication, that means that you have a subordinate talking to a boss. There is a communication between a person of a lower hierarchy to a higher hierarchy. That's an upward communication. While the downward communication is the opposite. We have a boss or a manager talking to a subordinate. A person of a higher rank or level talking to someone belonging to a lower hierarchy. That's a downward communication. There's another way of communication which is known as horizontal or lateral. Horizontal or lateral. This is a kind of communication that happens between or among people who belong to the same level. Subordinate to subordinate or manager to manager, as all of them are called managers. Shareholders, what kind of communication will happen among them? Lateral or vertical? Nicole, ano Nathan? Nathan?
Shareholders to shareholders, sir, or
Yes, yes.
shareholders.
What kind of communication, Nathan?
Horizontal.
Horizontal or lateral, correct. What about Nicole? President to vice president for marketing. What kind of communication is that?
Downward communication, sir.
It's a downward. Take note of what I said. Oh, president to vice president for marketing. The president is at a higher position, at a higher hierarchy, while the vice president is at the lower hierarchy. Though the position is still quite high, vice president, but the other person is at a higher level. So that's a downward communication, vertical in nature. There is also a chance where someone just communicates with anybody of the different departments, anybody of the other departments, regardless of levels, hierarchy levels, and that is a diagonal communication. For instance, Nathan is our executive head. Nicole is executive head. Nicole is a manager, and I belong to manager of the marketing department, and then I belong to the finance department. If I decide to talk to Nicole, take note, we belong to two different departments. For whatever intention it is that I communicated with Nicole and then Nicole gave responses to my concerns, we are actually doing a diagonal communication. And then if I decide to talk to Nathan and then ignoring what my level is, Nathan can just approach to me or talk to me. That could also be a diagonal communication. When you talk of flows in communication, that would eventually lead to communication networks. It could be a chain network where there is a usual upward or downward communication network. So you should expect that the vertical communication is under a chain network. The hierarchy is really observed. In a wheel network, the leader and other members of the team or group can just communicate among themselves. Same team, same wheel. In an all-channel network, communication among all members of the team is really free. It's like a diagonal. kind of communication. You are free to communicate with anybody. That's an all-channel network. A new network, it's not really new, but a modified network has arrived in the presence of technology and devices. That is the computer network, where people need not converse among themselves personally. There's another platform to do it, and that's using using technology. That is why emails are available, teleconferencing are available like this one, video conferences are also done. That's a sample of a computer network. Despite the many ways by which communication can be done, there are also challenges to achieve the goals of communication in an organization. We term these challenges as the barriers to communication. What are these barriers? You have filtering. To filter information means to shape information, or to be selective with information, to only listen for the ones that are good or advantageous to the receiver. To filter is to leave out information which would be unbeneficial to the receiver. How this is seen to be a barrier because we are not really sure if those unbeneficial information are totally useless. Without filtering the information, the receiver is supposed to weigh in why some parts of the information are why some parts of the information do not sound beneficial. There's perhaps a good reason of the negative nature of those information. Instead of while filtering brings something good, it's also suggested that the listener or the receiver really try to absorb and evaluate the reason for that negative nature of information. Emotions. When emotions come in, sometimes information, our ideas will lose their rationality. When emotions prevail in the giving of information, tendency is we will have lost the essence, or the essence of the information that we wanted to convey. There might also be an information overload when there's just so much information to be absorbed. Too much many information, that's fine. Too much information, that's where we draw the line. When someone receives too much information, most probably nothing will be left with an impression. Worse, the receiver will not be able to remember or understand anything. Defensiveness is another barrier to communication, where the receiver tends to protect him or herself for anything that could harm or threaten him or her. Language could prove to be another barrier. Imagine if you're speaking in a language that could not be understood well by the receiver. The receiver will just probably be nodding his head, or if not, will not really respond at all, will not show any reaction at all. Because then again, the receiver has not understood a point. Then national culture, in relation to language, the background of the person may affect his or her understanding of the information being relayed in that level process of communication. In the presence of these communication barriers, you are suggested with ways to overcome them. Like we use feedback. Using feedback, we should learn to give comments and suggestions. Our comments and suggestions are expected to um to help better the information that we just received, to evaluate if the information we've been told is good or not, so that the sender of the information can do something about it on some other time, or when another chance for communication happens, the previous sender will now have something to also consider in relation to sending information. Using simple language. Highfalutin words may impress listeners, but there may be a bigger portion of the population who will find these words not understandable. If the goal is to understand is to understand others and to be understood, then there's no reason why language will not be simple in the first place. Communication does not gauge one's intelligence in terms of the vocabulary that you have, in terms of your pool of vocabulary. Communication's goal is for you to meet an understanding between you and the person you're talking to. A simple language could pretty much contribute to that. Another one, active listening. Active listening is not just like hearing. It's absorbing whatever the other person says and then processing that information without losing the essence of what was heard. Active listening could give the reader the chance to provide quality feedback. The feedback provided will be assured as as it is connected, very much connected to whatever information was received or decoded by the receiver. We do not want a feedback to be unrelated to that decoded message. Controlling emotions. When emotions are barriers to communication, they should be controlled, they should be regulated. The speaker, the sender should try to tone down their emotions in order for their interpretations of things not to be overshadowed, not to be covered by their emotions. Body language, observing body language. One should look at what the person is physically doing, what the person is physically manifesting. Like if there's a shrug of a shoulder, if there's a raising of an eyebrow, they already mean so much. And these body languages or these movements as part of body language are altogether part of the communication process. It is going to be still a demand for the listener, for the receiver to understand what these actions mean. So now that we have gone into communication, how it helps in leading and managing an organization, we are then going to proceed to a part where we've been told that there's there are chances of changes and diversification in an organization. An organization is composed of people. So we are composed of individual units sharing differences and likenesses. Look at that line. We share our differences. At the same time, we also share our likenesses. We share them because despite our differences, we are put together in one venue, in one in one organization. Just like this, there are three of us in this Zoom call. The three of us share differences. At the same time, the three of us have likenesses. But we are told to manage. We have always been reminded to manage, to learn to live above our differences. We will not totally scrape out the differences that we have in that organization. We are not to ignore that we have differences, but we have living above these differences would mean that we are accepting the fact that we have differences and that we are going to also adjust ourselves in relation to the differences that we share. Adjusting is really accepting, because if we do not accept the fact, we do not try to adjust to the differences that we have among the members in the organization, we can't really be assured of being able to accomplish a task, given that we are grouped with people who have differences as we do. Like this, look at your research. Let's look at your research as a clear example. How are you able to successfully do your research? If you are going to stick to your own perspective only when doing research, ignoring what your group mate has to say about it, you'll encounter a lot of conflicts. One big difference now is the places where you are residing. That's one clear difference, diba? Nicole is where you is, that's not Isidro, Nicole, no? Dao. San Isidro. Nicole is in San Isidro.
San
Nathan,
Isidro po.
Nathan, you are in Dampas. Nathan is in Dampas. You have a differences of residence. If you don't try to accept that differences, then at least one of you would say, no, we should do the experiment here. Nicole, you should come here to Dampas, Nicole. Or Nicole would say, no, Nathan, you should come here to San Isidro and we will do the experiment here. I will not do the experiment if you do not come to my place. Diba? What will that lead into? Conflicts, misunderstandings. But because you've tried to understand each other's differences, you arrived at decisions like, okay, so Nathan, you'll do the experiment and then you tell me, I'll make the write-up. I'll help create the write-up. But that's an arrangement. That's a manner of adjustment. You learn to adjust because you look at your differences and accepted those differences. When you talk of changes, though, in an organization, changes can happen in three ways. There are three types of changes. There may be changes in people, changes in structure, or changes in technology. Obviously, the changes in technology would involve the change of equipment, the change of method of operations. Perhaps from having a manual system, you will now go into an automated system. So that's a change in technology. A change in structure would involve you being transferred to another office, you being given a different task, you being promoted. That's a different structure. So that's a different structure now. That's a change in structure. Changes in people would mean personality changes or changes within the persons themselves. In the passage of time, as they have been working in a particular organization, most probably their personalities change. You might start to be the introvert worker, but in the passage of time, you became an extrovert. You've learned to adapt to the environment where you have been placed, and so you've learned to adjust and be more gregarious in that environment compared to the first time that you were really quiet and isolated. So those are the types of changes in the organization, changes that could happen inside an organization. In the presence of these changes, there are still others who would find it difficult to adjust to changes. They come out to be resistant to these changes. They would refuse to accept these changes. But these changes probably are just bound to happen. In order for the employees or for the members of the organization to be accustomed to these changes, there are ways or tools provided to manage their resistance. To manage their resistance to changes means to reduce the chances by which they would resist these changes. The first one is education. They should be educated. Members of the organization should be educated on why the change is relevant. They should be told of the reasons for the changes. They should be told of who will be involved. They should be told of when the changes will happen, will take place. All of these will condition the members of the organization that the change should really happen or could really happen. It's bound to happen. Participation will also invite a reduction of resistance to changes. Once members have been given a chance to participate in the making of decisions, they would feel as though they have some form of responsibility now, and that they are really involved in whatever change that's going to happen. Facilitation and support. The assurance that when changes happen, employees, members will be provided with skills training. They'll be facilitated, they'll be supported. They will not be left by themselves, just by themselves, to adjust or to adapt to that change or to those changes. Manipulation of information, withholding information which could be detrimental to the acceptance of a change. Selection of people, choosing the right persons who are capable of embracing change. For instance, in a group of 10, you found out that there's one who could be given a particular a leveled up task, and then upon in the passage of time, in the many years that you've had an experience with that person, you're really able to prove that that single person is capable of changing or adapting to changes. So among the 10, you'll just have to offer the change of a position, a rank, or a responsibility to that single person, to that single unit. If others in that passage of time will prove themselves to be also capable, then you might want to offer that change to them. But if others do not welcome these changes, then they will not have to be enforced on those people. The last one, which is not highly suggested, is coercion. When threat or force is used for someone to accept change. It is a form of bullying, as found in the module. It's a form of bullying. It's unhealthy because it's not giving the member of the organization a chance to speak for him or herself. It's for it just might lead to really very unproductive results, because the person who is going to change, or the person placed on a changed environment, is not ready to adapt yet. You also have the ways to manage a workplace diversity. In the presence of diversity in the workplace, we are told to encourage members of the organization to accept each other's differences, to learn to accept the different cultures that the employees have come from, the backgrounds where these employees have come from. In relation to that, there are Filipino values and international influences that have been carried over in the idea of managing organizations. The first among these Filipino values, primary values, is social acceptance. And that is the desire to be accepted and to be treated well by others, despite your accomplishments, despite your status, despite your background, your um, your academic achievements, despite your income earnings, despite your rank, social rank in the organization. Social acceptance is just is but a Filipino value that is inherent already among members of an organization. It's quite normal in an organization for a member to feel that need to be accepted. For sure, no one in an organization wishes to continue working in isolation. You would not want to be isolated the entire time that you've been working in that company. As part of that desire to be treated well by others and to be accepted by others, the member should learn to communicate. That member of the organization should learn to establish good relations with others. You also have economic security. That is, of course, the desire to have financial stability, or to be able to stand on one's own feet. Another Filipino value is social mobility. Social mobility is the desire to be leveled up, or to move up the social ladder, or to move up to another position, to a higher position. While others would wish or would feel satisfied staying in the position that they are in, a majority would rather hope that they be promoted, or they be given an opportunity of a higher rank. Achieving that is what social mobility is trying to convey. While there are three primary values that are positive in nature, the module also presents the three negative values that are naturally observable among members in an organization. The first one is the mañana habit, the desire to do something or to put something at a later time. Dingas kugon is the second one, and that is to show interest, to do a particular task with so much interest and enthusiasm at first, But that level of interest and enthusiasm eventually dies down. The invested enthusiasm and interest is not the same from start to finish. Then you have the Filipino time. This is probably the worst. The Filipino time is such a wrong concept of being late. The issue of tardiness. The Filipino, it's I got this from whose video was that on social media? There's one, a YouTuber. He's a vlogger, a YouTuber, a social media influencer who found out that there is something common among every culture in the world, among everyone in the world, and that is that we are all late, or we all have the tendency to exhibit tardiness. In the Philippines, the culture names it that's the Filipino time, but other nations also have their own time. What is that, Singaporean or Indonesian time? They have that. An Afghan time, a Turkish time. They have their own versions of being late. But technically, being late should be rather avoided. If you talk about Filipino values influencing the way organizations are being managed, you also have international values, foreign culture or foreign values creating an impact on the way on the way organizations are being led and managed. One of these values is gender egalitarianism. Gender egalitarianism has something to do with putting much effort in order to minimize gender discrimination and role inequalities. In the practice of the Philippine setup or Philippine arena, job opportunities are not anymore being made exclusive only to one particular gender. Though practices of old are quite exclusive only to a particular gender, this time professions and jobs have tried to be quite flexible. The field of medicine is not only made exclusive to one gender, the field of teaching, the corporate world is not only exclusive for one gender, the world of law is not only, even politics itself is not anymore just made exclusive to one gender. That's the thrust of gender egalitarianism. You also have assertiveness. Assertiveness, which refers to being confrontational and dominant in relation to social relationships, being able to communicate oneself as bound in a social relationship. You also have performance orientation and humane orientation. Performance orientation is trying to give a reward for having achieved excellence out of one's performance. Humane orientation is being able to reward someone or acknowledge someone for his good behavior towards others, of how others have been humanely treated, that is with kindness, fairness, friendliness, generosity, benevolence, being good to others will be given reward, recognition, and acknowledgement. That's under humane orientation. But if it has something to do with how well as a person has improved in a particular field or course, being able to achieve excellence in a particular task or objective, that is performance orientation. Whew. And that concludes leading. A long lesson. My God. Questions, Nathan and Nicole? Questions?